From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Politics Now. I'm John Langler. The meeting Wednesday night stretched into Thursday morning. And at the end, Clark County School Board members gave Superintendent Dr. Jesus Jara approval to create a coronavirus vaccine mandate policy. Now, it's not in effect yet. And meanwhile, unions are still waiting to see exactly what the district does. Kate Houston breaks down the next steps.
I spoke to 2 of the 4 unions. They're both eager to work through the details of the plan with the school district and avoid losing any employees, saying the district can't afford it.
It's not ready to be mandated, and it should be a right.
We have to grow up and stop throwing tantrums like 5-year-olds over a vaccine.
USA! Opposing views over a resolution to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine for school district employees. Now the Clark County Education Association and Clark County Association of School Administrators and Professional Technical Employees are working to represent both sides. CCEA President Marie Nisis wants to ensure every staff member has a job. Since the resolution passed, she has heard from concerned educators.
What are next steps? Do I need to go ahead and quit now? Do I apply for a job elsewhere? You know, we're telling everyone to just, hang tight. We're advocating for both sides, and we're seeing what we can come up with after we meet with the district.
Nisis says one possible solution would be for unvaccinated educators to do distance education instead of being inside the classroom. Another concern is how the district will handle discipline if an employee is not vaccinated. Jeff Horn with the CCASAPE says they'll be specifically looking into this when negotiating starts. Horn would not support mandating termination if employees are not vaccinated. Kate Houston, 8 News Now.
Both unions we discussed in that story there expect the process to go fast at CCSD. They don't want it rushed, though. Now to the 2022 campaign trail. Wounded former Army Captain Sam Brown made a splash when he announced he was running for Senate here in Nevada. Brown was injured in Afghanistan in 2008 after being hit by an improvised explosive device. You're looking at that campaign video now. Brown now lives in Reno, and he's running as a Republican for Catherine Cortez Masto's Senate seat. This week we sat down with Brown to talk about his candidacy, and given the recent end of the war in Afghanistan, a war which injured Brown, we asked him about his recent call for President Biden and other military leaders to resign.
What has occurred with President Biden's execution of this withdrawal is it has damaged the trust of not only the American people, but the American soldier. And I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks talking to my fellow soldiers, folks that I served with, folks that I didn't serve with, but served in other parts of Afghanistan, folks who served in Iraq, even some Vietnam veterans. And one of the common themes that I'm hearing is that people feel that they were used by our government for a political agenda.
Do you believe that it was right to at least withdraw, even if the method was wrong? It was, in your view, wrong. Was the general, the thought of actually withdrawing the right move?
Yeah, and directionally, I was in agreement with the withdrawal. The execution of it was very terrible. I do also think that, the circumstances in terms of the way that the Taliban was moving and the decisions on leaving weapons and equipment, could have changed how the timeline of withdrawal, which we never should have been stating that to begin with. But yes, I do think that Americans should have eventually withdrawn.
There have recently been some movement on the issue of DACA. That's been an ongoing discussion in the courts and on Capitol Hill, back with the Trump administration, Obama, and now into the Biden administration. What would you like to see moving forward with DACA and, I guess more broadly, solving the immigration situation on the border?
Yeah, so this is a prime example of a case where politicians use a real-life human issue for to be a pawn on a campaign and political cycle. DACA recipients are awarded that deferment of action based off of hitting certain criteria. Essentially, they are good, engaged members of the community, and what I would like to see is a move away from executive action where we just leave it to whoever happens to sit in the White House to make a lot of those decisions. Congress needs to address this issue without waiving this threat of deporting people who've been a good member of society every 2 years. And Congress needs to address this, provide long-term deferment for those people who continue to be a good member of society, and address that issue in conjunction with making sure that we secure the border. That has to be an active part of that.
There's Adam Laxalt running as well for this seat. You mentioned a little bit about the political establishment, the political class. I guess, do you consider Mr. Laxalt as being part of that, and how do you differentiate yourself from Adam?
You know, Adam's experience kind of speaks for itself. He's been a part of, you know, running 4 campaigns and involved in Nevada politics since he moved here shortly after 2013. And you know, his record stands for itself. And so I differentiate myself in terms of I have not entered this race as someone who is aspiring to be a career politician or has a long history of working in politics or around politics. And so I bring a perspective of living in a world where, you know, I can relate to my neighbors. My kids go to the same schools as my neighbors, and you know, I've had real jobs and I continue to work real jobs, and that's what Nevadans need, is someone who understands our issues.
We also asked Brown about his views on economic policy and infrastructure. You can see the full interview at 8newsnow.com. We also have interviews with the other Republicans who have announced they are running for Senate. One of those candidates, as we mentioned in that interview, is former State Attorney General Adam Laxalt. This week, Laxalt named his campaign co-chairs, and there are nearly 3 dozen of them. They include former Governor Bob List, City of Las Vegas Mayor Pro Tem Stavros Anthony, and former Clark County Commissioner Bruce Woodbury. Laxalt's one of several Republicans trying to unseat Democratic Senator Cortez Masto in 2022. Culinary union leaders and Democrats in the Latino community here in the Valley are attacking Laxalt's stance on the infrastructure bill, which is working its way through Congress right now. They say a vote for him is a vote for former President Donald Trump. Mr. Trump has endorsed Laxalt, who is against the bipartisan infrastructure plan that's expected to bring thousands of new jobs to Nevada.
We know he doesn't care about Nevada. He doesn't care about anything. The only thing he cares is about to please Donald Trump.
Out the gate, Laxalt would attack something that's going to bring billions of dollars to this state. That's going to go to the very kids we've been working with.
In response, Mr. Laxalt's campaign said, quote, Mr. Trump gained Latino support by focusing on the needs of the American working family, many of which are proud, hard-working Latinos, and Laxalt was there all along, unquote. Caesars Palace says it will not host a scheduled conference linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory. The Patriot Double Down event was scheduled for late October, and among those listed as speakers was Republican candidate for Secretary of State Jim Marchant. QAnon is that far-right conspiracy group which believes former President Trump will expose a group of Satan-worshiping pedophile cannibals and declare martial law. It is unclear where the event will be held now. Nevada Democrats are speaking out against a restrictive Texas abortion law. It went into effect on Thursday after the U.S. Supreme Court declined an emergency appeal to stop it. Justices still need to rule, though, on the legality of the law. What Texas lawmakers passed prohibits nearly all abortions once a fetal heartbeat can be detected, usually about 6 weeks. Critics say that's before many women know they're pregnant. Instead of relying on government officials to enforce the law, what Texas passed empowers anyone in the United States to sue Texas abortion providers and anyone who assists with an abortion. Opponents say that could even include, for example, a friend who drives a woman to her abortion appointment or a clergy member who offers advice. The law provides at least a $10,000 reward for anyone who files a lawsuit and wins. It makes no exception for cases of rape or incest, only for medical emergencies. Nevada's congressional Democrats all had very strong criticism for that Texas bill, except more legal challenges moving forward. In Nevada, access to abortion is guaranteed in the state constitution up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. That was in a ballot initiative passed back in 1990. a law similar to what was passed in Texas could never really move forward here, even if Roe versus Wade, that case, was overturned. It would take in Nevada a constitutional amendment and a general election vote to remove it.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Local attorney Sigal Chattah has sued Governor Steve Sisolak and the state of Nevada several times. The motive? COVID mandates. She won litigation over capacity limits in churches already. A case is ongoing that deals with the indoor mask mandate. Chattah now is running as a Republican for Attorney General against Democratic incumbent Aaron Ford. In several lawsuits, other litigation with regards to those issues, what is it about the regulations that were put in place, the mandates, that you find unconstitutional?
Well, one of the things that we have to look at is that there was a lot of arbitrariness in these decisions. We saw that they were not based on science. For example, you could open up a casino and you can have people gaming, but you couldn't go to a place of worship. And those things just simply don't make sense. You can have people in large gatherings in restaurants, but you couldn't go to, again, you know, certain restaurants that had bars. There were all these arbitrary rules that none of them made sense with the science.
Do you believe the 2020 election was stolen?
I don't think that the 2020 election was stolen.
You
no.
don't think that the claims of fraudulent ballots or any those are valid? You think that the president, for example, won fair and square? Look, here's the reality. Only because you brought up election integrity.
Right. The reality of it is, I'm a lawyer. Unless I see proof, it doesn't exist. That's how I've litigated my cases. That's how I've defended my cases. Okay? So unless I see concrete proof that there was a steal, I don't believe it. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that there was not issues with voter fraud. Yes, we have evidence of voter fraud, but to take that and to make that leap from certain voter fraud to a stolen election, I'm a very pragmatic attorney. I need to see the proof.
Whether the Attorney General's office should do the pattern and practice investigations into use of force. As Attorney General, if you're elected, would you follow through with that? Or what do you think is the best way for police to be investigated?
You know, I want to tell you that after 2014, and I want to commend the sheriff in this, Joe Lombardo has done an incredible job with I think after 2014, what we saw is the recalibration of LVMPD and the police department. So to unilaterally decide that our police department needs to be tweaked, I don't agree with that. I think, again, the sheriff has done an outstanding job since 2014.
The opioid lawsuits, the issue of painkillers, and the state of Nevada was not involved in a broader lawsuit. Do you believe that the state should have been involved in that, or do you think the best way to go about it to try and get some penalty back was for Nevada to go solo?
I don't agree with the AG's decision to opt out of the $26 billion settlement, the global settlement. And the reason why I don't agree with that is because, again, sometimes a bird in the hand is better than two in the sky. I think that right now, families in Nevada are entitled to recovery. I think right now we need recovery in the state of Nevada for institutions that help opioid addiction. I don't necessarily agree that holding out for either a better settlement down the road or holding out for a higher jury verdict is the right thing to do when you're compromising people's ability to obtain recovery now.
Chattah says the first thing she would bring to the Attorney General's office if she's elected is, she says, transparency. She explores that more, and we have a lot more of a discussion with her. The full interview is at 8newsnow.com. We did ask the Attorney General, Mr. Ford, to do an interview as well. At this time, he said he has no availability. Tens of thousands of Afghans evacuated in the final days of the war in Afghanistan. Well, they're now here in the U.S., and there are talks in Congress about trying to raise the refugee cap. Meanwhile, the Biden administration says about 100 Americans are still in Afghanistan. Officials are trying to work to get them out. For now, those Afghans are being brought to the U.S.
As of this morning, there are approximately 20,000 Afghans who arrived at 8 different military bases in the continental United States.
Joining us now from our Washington, D.C. bureau, Alexandra Limon, to talk about this issue. Alex, let's get into it. Some groups, some lawmakers are pushing for the Biden administration to increase that refugee cap to let more come into the United States. That's an ongoing discussion. Where do things stand right now?
Well, first off, the Biden administration had already increased the refugee cap this year significantly to more than 60,000 refugees and had already announced plans for the refugee cap to increase to about 125,000 for the next fiscal year, which actually begins next month on October 1st. But humanitarian agencies around the world and a group of progressive Democrats, like you said, are pushing for the administration and the president to raise the refugee cap even further. They would like to see the number of 200,000 refugees for the year, citing, of course, the end of the war in Afghanistan, saying there are just so many translators and others who helped the United States, but then also their family members, who may be at risk or in danger because of the Taliban threatening their lives for helping the U.S. And that's not the only issue. These progressive Democrats and others say there are other crises happening around the world, like in Haiti, for example, and they say that's why there is this need. However, at this point, we have not heard anything from the Biden administration as far as, agreeing to raise the cap. So as far as we know for next year, that will still be at 125,000 refugees. Meanwhile, we have talked to some Republicans on Capitol Hill who say that they are actually opposed to raising the refugee cap. I spoke to Texas Congressman Jody Arrington, for example, and he cited being against that idea because he says there's also already so many asylum seekers that are arriving to our southern border. Now, those are different numbers. Those numbers don't contribute toward the refugee cap, but he says in total there's already too much immigration happening.
There's some concern about the vetting process with so many people from Afghanistan coming here to the United States. What is the vetting process now to make sure that the people who are getting here to our shores are supposed to be here?
Yeah, I think part of the concern is that we've heard such large numbers, tens of thousands of people arriving to the United States from Afghanistan in such a short and quick amount of time. But Press Secretary Jen Psaki this week said that there is absolutely no one who is coming to the United States, no Afghan person who has not already been thoroughly vetted and background checked before heading to the U.S. And that's actually something that we heard from Pentagon officials as well, even much earlier in the process when they were still actively evacuating people out of Afghanistan. Pentagon officials, stressed that anyone who got onto a plane headed to the United States, either from Afghanistan or from a third country, was thoroughly vetted and background checked before they even stepped foot on a plane. And so we do know that the White House and Biden administration is working with states around the country and governors and other officials to make sure that everyone understands that and that they kind of address those concerns before refugees head to those states around the country.
It is a mammoth task. Alex Limon joining us from Washington. Thank you very much. A school board in Virginia was about 3 hours into its meeting recently when a Bart Simpson lined up the public comment agenda with some fake names.
Wayne Kerr, Eileen Dover.
Yes, we can't play most of those fake names here on television, but the board read about half a dozen of them. This was video taken by a local newspaper there in Virginia, and it turned out only one person actually addressed the board. All right, so here's a look at what to watch this week in politics, and chiefly it is unemployment. 2 federal programs providing unemployment have ended here in Nevada and nationwide. Combined here in Nevada, they had about 116,000 claims for both programs here in Nevada in the last week before they ended. So we're going to look into what they may do to the job market here in Las Vegas. Also, next week marks 20 years since this attacks on September 11th. So we have several special stories lined up for you next week about the tragedy. covering it. We'll have the remembrances as well all week long on 8 News Now and, of course, here on Politics Now as well. We thank you so much for joining us here on Politics Now. All the latest political news at 8newsnow.com. Have a good week. We'll see you next week.